So good evening, everybody, and a huge welcome to everyone to what is actually our first of a very exciting series of EduSpots author talks. So the idea behind leading these types of talks was really to bring people together to discuss really exciting ideas that link to and match up with EduSpots values and vision in different ways. So whilst there's a sort of part fundraising element tonight, the real aim that we have is to generate the sense of community that builds around lots of ideas that EduSpots holds really true to its vision and values. So for those of you who don't know what EduSpots is, I hope that this might be the start of, we sometimes refer to ourselves as a bit of a family, but I see us also as a group of people who have a certain way of thinking about education, development, and leadership. So EduSpots is a partly Ghanaian and partly sort of global network of community change makers, and our mission is to connect, train and equip local volunteers to lead community-led change through education centres that we call spots. And these spots are all managed by the community, owned by the community, and the whole philosophy that is behind EduSpots is around basically giving people the skills to be active citizens and creating community-driven change, with education being at the centre of that. So I hope you can see that inviting someone with a book called Citizens is quite quickly a link to what we're doing. So I thought I'd just sort of start by introducing Jon very briefly, but I think you'll get a better sense of him, not through my own words, but through his own sort of storytelling as we go through the talk this evening. So Jon, I think actually I recently found this out, studied classics at university, but then moved into advertising. And I'm sure he's going to tell us a little bit about how his time in advertising actually influenced his thinking in different ways. He then went on to found a sort of, is it a political consultancy combined with a sort of, how would you describe it, Jon? This is why your words are better than mine.
You're handing over in the midst of the introduction.
Yeah, always good.
It's a sort of consultancy business. Yeah, I don't think you need to say too much more than that. But it's all about. It's called the New Citizenship Project, and it's all about treating people as citizens instead of just consumers. So you see the jump from the advertising industry in that.
Yeah, so you'll really quickly see how the ideas that underpin Jon's consultancy are at the centre of this book, which has recently been released, called Citizens. So without me speaking too much further about it, I think it's really important that we just start with understanding your core idea that's right at the heart of this book. So you could just tell us a little bit, Jon, about what your broad thinking is behind this concept of citizens.
What are you even talking about? No, it's just to say it's lovely to be here. The book actually isn't officially published until tomorrow, in fact. So this is an EduSpots sneak preview. Although for various reasons there've been a few copies out and about in the wild for a while. So the core idea of the book, really, and the reason I wrote it was to offer a way of seeing the moment in time we're living in the sort of broadest kind of global sense, and in the sort of early 21st century, but in particular kind of very immediately in this moment where so much we live in sort of some pretty dark times in so many ways, but to offer a way of seeing that moment in time which says that yes, there is something falling apart and we need to acknowledge that, and something is breaking, but also that there's something emerging and forming that could offer a way to create a much more hopeful future. And so the core thesis basically is that there's to offer a way of understanding society that says that at any given moment there's a dominant story of the role of the individual in society that shapes an awful lot of how we interact with one another. And at the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th, and for quite a long time up until that point, the dominant story, and I'm really looking forward to getting into this with some of you guys and challenging the kind of colonial aspects of the story. But the end of the 19th century, the dominant story is something like the subject. So the subject story says the right thing to do is to keep your head down, do as you're told, get what you're given, on the basis that the God-given few who rule society know best and sort of deserve to be there. And if we all do as they say, then the best outcomes for society will result. And my argument is that, like I say, at the beginning of the 20th century, that story started to fall apart pretty dramatically. And through the course of 2 world wars, it crumbled almost completely. And what came out of the two world wars was what was more or less consciously and deliberately put into place was what I call the consumer story. And the consumer story says the right thing to do is to look out for number one, to get the best deal for yourself, to choose the best option for you from those that are offered, on the basis that individual self-interest and the pursuit of individual self-interest will add up to collective interest. And my argument that really is that what's happening in this moment in time, in this sort of broad moment in time, is that that story is collapsing much as the subject story did before. We're seeing the kind of the contradictions and the fallacies at the heart of that story, kind of bringing society, bringing many aspects of society down around us. But as I say, there's something emerging as well. And so just as the consumer story is falling apart, the citizen story is and has been rising all over the world. And the citizen story says the right thing to do actually is to get involved, to share your ideas, energy, and resources, to encourage others to contribute theirs, on the basis that all of us are smarter than any of us, all of us are better than any of us. And when we collaborate and tap into all those diverse perspectives, then that is how we'll figure out the best outcomes for society as a whole. And so critically, it's a kind of, and this isn't an argument about that's saying this is what should happen. It's an argument that's saying this is what is happening, that all over the world. And EduSpots is a wonderful example. The work you guys are all doing, I think, is absolutely an example of this. But equally, sort of the rise of participatory democracy in places like Taiwan and Chile and Paris is part of this. The way charities are shifting from simply sort of selling benefits to people to actually involving people and building movements, the way even businesses are shifting beyond seeing people just as consumers of products and actually starting to involve them and tap into their ideas in even a commercial sense. There's something really fundamental shifting, and particularly in this moment in time, that there's huge hope in that if we can see it and step into it. So the book is really about saying, look, there's this whole great way we could be and do stuff. Let's see it now while the opportunity is there.
So I'm interested to understand a little bit more about your sort of understanding of stories and their role in this, as you often, when you're sort of framing your ideas, you talk about the citizen's story or the consumer's story. I'm interested to know whether you feel that these stories are things that represent underlying realities, or whether you feel that there's a sort of powerful role that storytelling and how we frame things itself can create change, or likely maybe there's sort of some combination between the two there.
I mean, what feels important to say, I think, is that I have kind of two deep beliefs, two sort of foundational beliefs about humanity and that run through the work. The first is that humans are by nature what I would call citizens, that we are collaborative, creative, caring creatures who can and want to like make the world better, shape the world for the better, and work together to do so. The second, though, is that we are storytelling and story dwelling creatures, and like we need stories in that sort of deepest sense to understand ourselves and actually to understand how to be good. We appeal to stories to help us interpret the world. They're sort of the maps that we navigate the territory of the world with. And the danger of that, the opportunity of that, is that we can tell stories together and about what we're trying to do, and we can build community and movement through that storytelling. The danger, of course, is that the stories are never 100% correct, and when and some stories are, people can manipulate stories and tell stories that actually shape us quite negatively, and I think my argument is that rather than, you often find in the sort of consumer story frame, there's often this idea that people are by nature selfish and lazy, and actually that we kind of lend ourselves to being competitive and fighting with one another, and the sort of the negative things that have happened in the history of humanity are the result of that. Sort of deeper bad nature, whereas I think what I'm arguing is that we are by nature as I say, collaborative, caring, creative. We want to be good. But the stories that we tell can sometimes shape us differently. And I think maybe we'll say a bit more about advertising in a moment, but just to say, like, that's where I sort of developed a lot of this thinking from. And particularly because the way my first boss described my job to me, he said, what you've got to remember is that the average consumer sees 3,000 commercial messages a day. This was a UK number. The latest numbers in the US are something like 10,000 a day. But he said the average consumer sees something like 3,000 commercial messages a day. Your job is to cut through that. And for a while, I was happy kind of competing and making mine the best. But then I started to think, like, what are we doing to ourselves when we have that many sort of prompts that we're consumers, that's our role, that our role is to choose between things. And I think that, and thinking about that in the light of, say, the way religions are stories that we tell ourselves, the stories that manifest themselves around us in so many ways, that is a deeply powerful kind of storytelling mechanism. And that's where a lot of this thinking comes from.
There's so many different strands of follow-up questions. And Mark, I'll come to your question in a second. And I really do encourage everyone, by the way, to throw any questions they have into the chat. But before we consider Mark's question, I'm interested to know a little bit more about what you think a citizen should do. What is your view of a good citizen? Is there some kind of a sort of moral view that underpins your thinking, or are you more just keen for people to get involved and participate?
Yeah, look, I mean, I think, so I started the book quite deliberately with 5 stories of emblematic citizens from so a couple from the UK, but actually my friend Kennedy Adede who started Shofco in Kenya, in Nairobi, and really what those 5 stories have in common, whether it's Billy, the white working class kind of organizer in Grimsby in northeast Lincolnshire in the UK, or Kennedy, is that they're all stories of people like not asking for permission, not waiting for something to be done for them, but just getting stuck in. And it's really like one of the unifying characteristics actually across an awful lot of these sorts of things is how often litter picks are sort of the beginning of this sort of thing. It's just these very simple things that people start doing together that allow them to start taking action in their local place, and feeling like and starting to make a difference, but also getting to know one another, and how the agency builds from there. But if I were to give a prescription, and builds from there into amazing things like, I mean, I'm sure some of you know Shofco, Kennedy's organization, but the number of schools and health clinics and so on and so forth that have multiplied out of what began in that way, and Billy's organization in Grimsby is now a major social housing provider in that community, and literally 5 years ago started with a litter pick. So and these things are really phenomenal. If I were to give the sort of the what do you do to be a good citizen answer though, I think it starts with committing to some place or community of some sort. And I talk in the book about the idea of home, which I think is really fundamental to a citizen. And again, if you think about a consumer is transitory and sort of treats places and so forth quite instrumentally, a citizen is rooted, right? And knowing and committing to a place or community of interest is really important. It might be your workplace. And then the critical next step is finding the others, right? It's saying like, who's here with me? How and then I think it's like, what can we do and how do we build from there? It's a sort of building of energy that is right at the heart of this thing.
I think that really resonates with EduSpots' model, because we're all about promoting local volunteerism, and we do a lot of support work with people who are working in different communities in Ghana, supporting people in other communities with how to build a local team, and that whole process, and then connecting with people in the ideas sharing space after you've built a local team, like starting with that basis of home, or in our sense where the spots are located. That sort of physical space does seem to have some relevance to our vision of citizens. I
think it just, I have to say, I'm like, the more I find out about EduSpots, the more excited I am by it. Like the way you guys create the context but just provide people the support and the space and the opportunity, but don't try and sort of do things for people, I think is really right at the heart of this. There's a table right at the beginning of the book, which in a way you could just flick to page 12 and then forget the book. But we put subject, consumer, citizen. I might even hold it up to the screen for people to get a quick flavor of this. But it's we kind of go, if anyone can see, subject, consumer, citizen, and then the second line says to, for, with, and it's this sort of thinking that goes like, subjects are people who have stuff done to them, they get commanded and controlled. Consumers are people who have stuff done for them, they get served and sort of catered to, and citizens are people who do stuff together with and through organizations. They get involved, and the role of organizations is to facilitate and enable, but not to do it for them. And I think EduSpots is a wonderful example of that, one I'm very excited to know better.
Yeah, if you read the book, everyone will see that there's a sort of chapter devoted to NGOs and how the citizens model can work in an organizational level. And I think what I loved to read most was this idea that charities are not there to serve particular people or to separate themselves even from the people that they're trying to help, but rather charities are ultimately about inclusion and making everyone feel as if they're a participant in the change rather than a beneficiary. And I know lots of charities are sort of moving towards that model. And I think a lot of talk is often done about the language used and avoiding terms like beneficiary, but I wonder how many, I think the key thing is rethinking the roles that people have and not just the language. I'm aware I've got a lot of different questions. I'm just going to jump to Mark so he doesn't feel I've neglected him. But going back to this idea of a citizen you've given to us, what do you think the main obstacles are for people? I guess there might be different obstacles in different settings, but what do you think the main obstacles are that stop us being engaged in the way that you would like us all to be?
I think what you were just saying about charities and some of the habits that we find very hard to break in all sorts of organizations leads into this question about obstacles really powerfully. I sometimes use the metaphor of gravity, like I think stories exert a kind of gravitational pull, and in the moment in time we're living in, while the consumer is still the kind of dominant story, it exerts a gravitational pull, and that manifests in many, like, basically you'll never get fired for adopting that kind of logic. So you end up in situations where people just sort of do what they did yesterday because it's what they've always done, and it's reinforced through little things like job titles or grant making processes, or all of these sorts of things just keep us trapped in a logic that we actually want to be breaking out of. So it's not so much there's a single obstacle as that the stories show up in so many different ways. I'm like the work we did with the National Trust. We talked a lot about, and so with the National Trust, I was part of, just to say a bit more about this example for people. The Trust, by the way, for those of you who don't know it, is a big charity here in the UK that owns and runs something like 500 historic houses and places of beauty across the country, essentially using a sort of visitor attraction business model, pay for entry business model. And what was so fascinating about the work we did was really that business model, that revenue model, had come to shape the organization into thinking of itself as a days out provider rather than as a cause, as a charity, and that showed up in all sorts of different ways in the organization, from as I say, job titles to incentives for payment reward for employees, all these sorts of things. And so the work we were doing was largely about saying, well, what would it look like to tell ourselves a different story about what this organization is? What if we talked about ourselves not so much as a visitor attraction business with a conservation charity somewhere in the background, but as a movement of people who care about and need beauty in their lives and acknowledge that need, And this led to some striking changes. So we changed membership from being framed as a free pass card that got people into attractions to being part of joining a movement. We changed, but we also we changed a staff cohort who were called wardens, who were sort of lowly members of staff whose job description was essentially to sort of protect nature from children and stop the visitor attractions being sullied by bad behaviour, and instead said, well, no, these are the people who are out there building the relationship between people and nature. So they're going to be called rangers, and they're going to have red uniforms to make them approachable and visible, and we're going to train them in social media. But it was also little things to this question about obstacles. It was little things like changing the job titles, changing the photography in the meeting rooms, changing the layout of the office so that different teams were mixed together, so that conservation staff were sat next to like operations staff rather than completely separate. Because like all of this stuff is about mulching it together so that you tap into all those ideas and energy rather than just stay in silos.
And I'm interested to know, sort of following from that, I definitely agree that we've seen this sort of wave of interest and people getting involved and wanting to be more than just a consumer, whether it's in the way they interact with organizations or whether it's the way that they just collaborate with others in society. And I definitely, I think we both live in Sevenoaks, and we saw the number of people who so quickly signed up to be part of something called Care for Our Community, sort of thousands of people wanting to volunteer for the local district council to support each other during COVID. And I was really interested, sort of after the initial lockdowns ended, what we could use that sort of volunteerism, those structures that had started to build at a local level. This really feeds into Laura's question that is really about how at a sort of national level, how can government policy and sort of national decision making actually recognize and then use this sort of active citizenship that has emerged. We can start with the UK, but I know it's a sort of thing that's occurred globally. How can they use that and build that into the way that they're operating and strategizing?
Well, look, the day I decided to actually like commit and write this book was the day, if people in the UK remember, that our government changed the message that they were using. So, from mid-March until May, the language was "stay home, protect the NHS, save lives," and then in May it shifted to "stay alert," and. I was staring. I'd been working with these ideas for a good few years by this point, and in that time, as you say, like it wasn't just in Sevenoaks, right? It was all over the country. There was and all over the world, like street WhatsApp groups and people popping postcards through the letterbox saying, "Can I help?" In the UK, we had this thing called the NHS First Responder Scheme, and 750,000 people signed up to be part of this thing inside 48 hours when the website was designed for 250,000. And we had all this sort of what I would call citizen energy, but we had this stay home message that was very much a kind of subject message that a sort of will protect you in return for you doing as you're told, and that the tension between those things was just palpable. But then when that stay home message started to feel like it was fraying, and the idea that our government was protecting us very well was falling apart, because that week the UK exceeded Italy for the highest death rate in Europe. But they changed it to stay alert. And what they were doing, I think, was stepping from subject story to consumer story. They were saying, it's all about individual responsibility. It's over to you. You look out for number one. And if you're careful, you'll be okay. And if they're not careful, then they'll get sick. But the moment for me when so I agree that this isn't in UK government policy, and I think there's huge opportunity. The story that researching for the book like set me on fire and made me go, this is just amazing, was looking by contrast at what had happened in Taiwan. Now, Taiwan, and I won't tell you the whole story now, because I'm sure we want to go to other places in the conversation. I could literally talk about Taiwan for hours, because I've gone so deep in understanding them and talking to people there. But the very brief version is they basically saw COVID as a challenge to the nation as a team, and they very much, in the language that I've talked about, this idea of people as citizens, they saw it as something where their response would be the best it could be if they tapped into the ideas and energy and resources of everyone, rather than just seeing people as there to be protected, or seeing people as selfish to who could only look out for themselves. And they did some amazing things as a result of that. I mean, among other things, like there was open source challenge prizes for people to develop software that would help map cases across the country and map where personal protective equipment was, and help government ship it around more quickly. There was a whole thing of crowdsourcing memes, actually, because disinformation was a major problem in Taiwan. To the Chinese, the state level disinformation going on, and all sorts of nasty, difficult stuff. And they actually they set up a site where when there was an incorrect or disinformation meme starting to spread through social media, they post it and then challenge the population to come up with a accurate information meme that was more shareable and more spreadable. But the lovely example, my favorite example, is the most direct and least high tech was they set up a phone line which any citizen could ring in with ideas for how the country's response could be better. And that with a voicemail recorded by the president herself, and people would just ring it, and they had artificial intelligence, like AI, used to sort of filter the ideas and so on. But there's this lovely story of a 6-year-old boy ringing up and saying, "You need to do something to make face masks cool for kids, because my older brother and they don't want to wear them." And 3 days later, and he suggested working with the national baseball team. 3 days later, they had the kids, half the national baseball team, on the national press conference in their face masks. And it's just like that attitude to, in a way, it's less about like what specific policy and more about the process of doing these things. I would love to see, for example, in this moment in time, like imagine if we were involved if Sadiq Khan were to initiate, the Mayor of London were to initiate a participatory democracy process on how we might clean up London, London's financial system. If the next national curriculum were to be designed as using a citizens' assembly, a random selection of students from across the country, if like these, rather than seeing people as there to be managed or sold to, seeing people as the source of genius to make things better, I think is the transformative thing. And there are now these processes, things like citizens' assemblies, open idea generation, participatory budgeting, all of these sorts of things that are possible and that have sort of proven cases behind them. And in a way, what I'm trying to do with Citizens is just offer a name and a label to that way of thinking and acting that makes the whole more than the sum of the parts.
So I guess, well, perhaps something like the concept of global citizenship might involve a sort of sense of commitment to humanity more widely. Just linking into Amjad's question, as you've already said, the concept of citizen is usually linked to some kind of space, or mostly people see it as linking to some kind of, to a nation of a sort. And Amjad's asking, I'm going to read it out, his question specifically: how do you reconcile your definition of a citizen and the sense with the political notion of being a citizen and belonging to a country and the concept of nationalism? Because I guess it's interesting for me, because I've had a lot of experience with Ghana, and Ghana is a country where there's a huge amount of national pride, and being a citizen is definitely can be really closely associated with nation building and sort of pride in Ghana as a whole. But as you'll understand, in the UK, that we don't have that, that there's a sort of can be a different attitude towards nationalism.
So one of the lovely discoveries in the research was the literal derivation of the word citizen. And what's funny about this is that we tend to think that the word citizen derives from city. So like city is the shorter word, citizen's the longer one. So clearly there's like a geographic idea to citizenship, right? And what I discovered was that literally the word citizen word citizen comes first, actually, before the word city. And the word citizen literally means together people. It means people who are meaningful in combination, in collaboration, that we're unique individuals, but we find our meaning when we come together. And the word city derives from the word citizen, and just literally means a place where people are together. So and in itself, that's kind of a joyful head flip. But to go a bit further into Amjad's question, because it's a great one. Like what I really love to do is talk about citizenship as practice as opposed to citizenship as status. And I'm sort of following, if anyone, like there's an amazing podcast that I would encourage you all to listen to, a guy called Baratunde Thurston in the States. And I just had the joy of doing a podcast with him and another lovely man called Rob Hopkins recently. But Baratunde runs a podcast called How to Citizen, where he uses citizen as a verb rather than a noun. And I really love that. But just, I mean, my version, citizenship as practice over citizenship as status, what I think is going on there is that actually when you reduce citizenship to the passport you hold, that's actually the consumer story taking over the idea of citizenship, because it's making it a product, it's making it a possession, and actually increasingly a possession that can be bought and sold, and in some really dark ways. Whereas what I'm talking about is much more about the orientation, and beautifully actually can claim to be the original kind of meaning of the word. So I think some people say to me, like, you ought not to use this language because it's been kind of co-opted by the nationalists, by the xenophobes. And my response to that is really, no, I think we have to fight for this language, because language, part of this appreciation of the role of story in the world is to start to appreciate how important words are as well. And I think we need the word citizen. And it's lovely to hear, and I think in Ghana, from what I understand of where Ghana's at, and I'd love to know more from people, but my understanding is that there's a moment available in Ghana to go like, no, we're really proud, and we're gonna be citizens doing something really powerful together. And I was struck just the other day. I saw the Kenyan ambassador to the UN. I don't know if people saw his speech in response to the Russian invasion of Ukraine, but he was talking about what nationhood being quite a confused thing in some ways, but just the decision to lean into something together and to be proud of a place and a shared some degree of shared heritage together, and not let others mess with that, I think was a really, really beautiful thing. Yeah, Amjad, you saw it too, yeah.
So I think everyone here is sort of probably in agreement with you about what you're saying. And I think one of the things that I know a lot of the volunteers in EduSpots sometimes struggle with is a slight feeling of isolation in being behind the concept of citizens. But you have this belief that everyone is sort of naturally at their sort of human nature level at heart a citizen. So just going to Adam's question of what strategies can someone adopt to awaken the consciousness of others to collectively participate towards desired goals, considering the fact that many people are unwilling to do things for free. And it's quite interesting. I think this is something in the Ghanaian context that really EduSpots is quite unique for, that we really do promote genuine volunteerism, really giving your time and really your heart and your energy to participate in the activities of the spot for free. And I know that's often very difficult in the setting. I talk to volunteers about how often volunteerism, it's assumed that there'll be certain costs paid in obviously a very challenging economic environment. So yeah, what strategies do you have to make people really want to get involved, and whether that would be in a voluntary capacity or whether there are opportunities for sort of paid involvement or choosing the right businesses or organizations to associate with where you can have economic benefits whilst also being part of the citizenship mission?
It's a really important. I'd love to hear from others as well if anyone wants to chip in on this. My sort of broad take is that people, when offered the opportunity to do something that feels commensurate with the scale of the challenges we face and feels like it gives us a part in something bigger, then we really want to do it. And then it becomes a question of how do we make it possible for us to continue doing it, and money comes in that place. As a sustainer of energy rather than as a transactional fee. And I think that's a healthy place for money to be. Give you a really live example. There was a perception that people would own the UK government would have to pay people an inordinate amount of money to take Ukrainian refugees, but actually the offer of the challenge of this is really a challenge that you can do something about, that is commensurate with the scale of the challenge of this moment in time. 100,000 people signing up within a day to welcome a Ukrainian refugee family into their household. And similarly, the NHS First Responder Scheme, there's something you can do that is commensurate with the scale of this big shared challenge, and you had 750,000 people in 48 hours. I think so for me, it's what people won't participate in, or at least won't participate in without asking the money question first, is something that isn't something that they feel ownership of, and isn't something that feels commensurate with the scale of the challenge in the way they can identify with. So in the second half of the book, the toolkit I set out that's derived from all of the work we've done as New Citizenship Project over time, we talk about 3 principles of participatory organizations, so we talk about purpose, platform, and prototype. And purpose is the first of these, and the absolute without which nothing, which is to say you have to have an answer to the question, what are you trying to do in the world that you're asking me to be part of? Not what do you want me to do for you, because that is the kind of question that leads to a transaction and requires money to change hands, quite rightly, frankly. But what are we trying to do in the world? What are you asking me to buy into? What are you asking me to be part of that actually needs me? Then that is a different kind of question. Then platform is about saying, what processes and structures and opportunities do you offer that let people get involved in that? How do you make it meaningful and joyful, so that actually I'm and acknowledge that I'm a contributor, and that you need me in this. And then thirdly, prototype, which is basically just to say you can't do this stuff by flipping a switch and kind of rolling out a giant thing. You have to build the energy. So I think when I put those together, that's the kind of that's what I'm talking about, really, is and obviously that manifests in specific ways in different contexts, but I think starting with that, this is what we're all facing, holding that challenge with people and acknowledging it and being honest. Take the Taiwanese work is a great example of that. We're facing COVID together. We're going to share all of the information with you. We're going to tell you what's going on, and we need your help. Contrast that with the UK, which is stay at home, do as you're told, don't cock anything up. We don't really expect you to follow these rules. And it just creates that sort of starting frame of really what's the purpose of this, I think creates a whole different conversation.
Just to take it really down to the sort of community level, because we do have quite a few local volunteers in the EduSpots network in this group. So to give a bit of context, our overall vision as an organization is to a world in which communities unite to create the futures they want to see. So it's this idea of community self-determination combined with teamwork. But underlying that is just this obvious belief in educational equity and the power of education to transform lives. So that's our kind of overall sort of vision of an organization. But now if we take it down to a community level at a local spot that looks pretty much like a library, but we'd love them to be more sort of centers of community-led change. If you are going to name, so Anita is in Gomoa Manzo. If Anita is trying to get a group of people to get behind her latest STEM camp so that she's not the only person volunteering, just how would you translate your ideas of purpose, platform, and prototype to her right in a community level, trying to bring people on board?
So I think, well, the first point the starting point is often to articulate a question, because answers mean you're selling something to people. Questions invite people in and ask for their ideas and their contributions. So it might be as simple as, I'll give you an example by sort of counterpoint, a question like, how can we make this community even better? How can we make this community an even better place to live, work and thrive? Is a wonderful kind of holding question. And then how can we use this space to support this community to be an even better place to live, work and thrive? What do you want to do to do that? What are you already doing is then the next sort of really great question. What are the best things about the place where we live that we want to build on? So I think this idea, like starting with questions, starting with positivity and energy, rather than starting with kind of what's wrong here that we want to fix, or what's the thing that we're trying to do that we want you to sort of buy from us. One of my favorite examples of this sort of thing is really simple thing is in Reykjavik in Iceland, in the aftermath of the financial crash there in like 2010, I think it was. A couple of game designers who'd moved to America moved back, and they built a website called Better Reykjavik, where and the frame was, we love Reykjavik, we're back in Iceland because we love it and we're proud of our country and we want to help make it better. What are your ideas? How can we make Reykjavik an even better place, literally, and this is where I took the language from, an even better place to live, work and thrive. And it's out there, a site just where people could put forward ideas and they'd be upvoted and downvoted, and then the conversation started to really grow. And then there was a mayoral election, and they challenged the candidates for this mayoral election to say, like, will one of you like take this on? Like, if you make this part of your platform, commit to listening to these ideas. And the guy that one person did, he came from nowhere, won the mayoral election. And then this platform became part of the way that the city of Reykjavik was governed. And now they have a system where the top ideas every month are debated in a special session of the city council and get a public response. And just that sense of like, what are we trying to do here? But also like, what are we building on that's already great? I really love, another, maybe a future book for your gathering, Kat, would be Cormac Russell. I'd really recommend his work to people. He wrote a book called Rekindling Democracy, and Cormac's done loads of work about and is one of the sort of four godfathers, as it were, of what's called asset-based community development. And he has but Cormac, because he's Irish, just has a lovely way of saying some of the things in this. And he has this lovely phrase. He says, "Start with what's strong, not what's wrong, and then use what's strong to fix what's wrong." And I really love that kind of vibe.
Sorry, I was just going to get the YouTube video to throw into the chat. Sometimes I don't know if me and you have just read a lot of the same stuff, and because we're working in the same type of field. But I just did a talk with my students where I picked up on that very same Cormac Russell sort of YouTube clip that's quite famous, where he asked people to start about what's strong in the community rather than always focus on the negative. And I do always find it quite interesting in all the sort of social entrepreneurship programs and prizes and so forth out there. They all ask you to start with a social or environmental problem, but I don't think I've come across a single application form for these kind of things where they ask you to start with an assets-based analysis of anything.
Well, then this takes us back to Mark's question about obstacles, right? Like this is how this stuff manifests, because the moment you start by staring at that, you're not starting by staring at like, how amazing is this place where this spot is, and what can we do here, and how cool it could be, and what's great already. It's like,
yeah, I've told this to my students as well. I just had a session with year 8 where I emphasized to them that if they go into, even if it's just a sort of home-based problem, if they go and sort of say with a vision of how great it would be if the problem was solved, rather than whinging on and on about the problem, that might sort of elicit a better response from parents. I promise I don't spend all my teaching role trying to help kids get what they want at home. I'm going to just go back to actually one of Amjad's earlier questions. So in this transition that you're encouraging us to shift from basically an individualistic society to a more collective focused one, where does all the questions around identity and representation that can sometimes focus more on the self and how we define ourselves, often in relation to others, but often as an individual, how does that fit into shaping this whole discussion?
I mean, I might not have completely followed the question, so Amjad, you might want to come in and make it clearer, make me answer it properly. Feel free to unmute and video and challenge. But I think what I would say is that if the framing of purpose in the conversation comes from deep enough, then everybody has everybody has a stake in a shared question. And so it becomes less about sort of who am I and what am I fighting for, and more about sort of what are we all holding together. And I think within that, it becomes easier to see the kind of the vital importance of diversity of view and background and everything in trying to hold that question better. Like one of my favorite initiatives that people may have come across is a thing called the Global Assembly, where in the run-up to COP26, they used NASA satellite technology to identify 100 random points on the globe, and then find a person from each of them, and then make them filter to be demographically representative of the global population, and then deliberate and make recommendations on and lay out a challenge to world leaders at COP on climate. And I think that that sort of idea of going, well, if we're really holding a question about what do we want to do as a global community, then you kind of have to look to sort of tap into all the different perspectives you can to answer it, rather than seeing it as seeing identity and representation as things that feel like they're sort of competitive or challenging. I don't know. Yeah, challenge me or like frame it again if I'm rabbiting randomly.
Great. No, thanks, Jon. I think that's a great sort of answer. But I was also just thinking now, if you look at the current crisis with Ukraine, right, we clearly see a disproportionate response, right? So the idea that not all refugees are treated equally, and not all refugees are given that same level. And we can contrast the crisis, Ukraine, Syria, Yemen, but even within Ukraine crisis, where we've seen, for example, people of color being treated differently to others, of not being given the same thing. So I'm just kind of conscious of that narrative coming in, right? So ultimately, yes, we all sort of see a problem collectively, and so maybe we tap into that collective wisdom to address it. But ultimately, there is still difference in that. And if you look at small island states, they're clearly facing a different challenge to that. And even if we take COP26, like I was told the amount of money that the EU has pledged for military arms to Ukraine is actually double what they pledged at COP26. So there's a huge disproportionate aspect there. And so I'm just thinking, is that something we just have to battle against? And so that's part of the challenge that we have to overcome.
I mean, what I'm inclined to, it's a little bit like this sort of start with what strong vibe, the kind of appreciative approach. It's like this. So firstly, I am 100% with you, and like there's some. I do not, sitting here as a white middle class Brit, like don't want to be saying like yeah, but I think there are two ways that we could play with some of the facts of what's happening today that you've just laid out so powerfully. One way is to say, for God's sake, like look at, now you're going to help, but you're not helping over there. The other way is to say, maybe this is what it takes for people to wake up to our shared humanity. Maybe it does take something so relatable and so direct and so close for us to actually open up, and maybe from there we can keep opening. And there's this lovely metaphor that a friend of mine talks about, citizenship as a muscle you build, not a cup you empty. And so rather than saying, oh well, you've got a fixed amount of generosity or whatever, and you're going to use it on these people because they look like you, it's more going, well, now you've started to use your muscle of opening your homes and welcoming people in. Maybe we can go from there and go, and look, these people are not that different either. If you and let's expand it and expand it and expand it, and let's together, then maybe we can take on Putin together rather than Russia. I would emphasize, maybe we can take on climate together as well. And so I think I don't mean to be sort of glib or simplistic about this in any way, but I think like there is a mindset that we can step into that's like, this could be this could be an awakening moment, and I think if we can step into this story. And that's why I've been saying things at the moment about, like, what if Ursula von der Leyen were to, Vladimir Zelensky made an astonishing speech the other day in Russian, speaking to the citizens of Russia as a citizen of Ukraine, and talking about brotherhood and sisterhood and shared culture and shared humanity. Imagine if Ursula von der Leyen were to do the same to the citizens of Russia as a citizen of Europe, or and how the cognitive shift that would take place if we could do that. So, and then the last thing I'll say on this, and I'm conscious of time as well, but and people wanting to get back to their lives, but the biggest obstacle, and the place where I kind of choose to end the book, and it speaks absolutely to this thing about it speaks to me as and the challenge to the kind of to the white people who've had too much power, actually, is to say, like, that one of the biggest challenges to this story is to the shift of story. One of the biggest obstacles actually isn't the kind of the open ill will or sort of badness. It's actually people who look and sound like me with a hero complex, thinking that our role is to come in and sort of save the world. Mm-hmm. and getting the chief executives and the heads of and the government leaders and so on to sort of take their suits off and stop thinking that they're here to be knights in shining suits is I think actually the kind of deepest challenge. And so, yeah, so what I end the book with this bit where I talk about, like, how to be an anti-hero, and I keep coming back as I reflect on the research and the work to this question of, like, how do we, like, not take a platform but open a platform? And again, it's why the more I find out about EduSpots and what you guys are all involved in, the more I love it, because it's explicitly the antithesis of the first experience I know Kat had of being involved in this kind of work, being a sort of paternalistic offer of rescue and help, and instead it's going, no, like, we're here, can we help? But, like, help by sort of supporting, not by sort of heroing. Sorry, there's a bit of a monologue, but it's a really important question. I hope there's some useful stuff in that.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think a lot of views of citizenship and global citizenship can completely miss out a power dimension, and can completely sort of forget the sort of critical thinking element that needs to accompany any sort of thoughts in relation to supporting their community. I think we're running out of time, but I think this links really well into the kind of, in a way, part of the purpose of tonight is based around power and representation. And I'm also aware that today it's been me speaking as a white person who's been born and brought up in the UK, and that I think in future sessions I will pass on the baton of hosting this to members of my Ghanaian team, but didn't want to throw them into the deep end for the first one. But the purpose actually of the fundraising side of tonight is to raise funds for African books by African authors, which are the greatest resource that are demanded. That's the wrong word, demanded. Our volunteers are never really particularly demanding, but they are the things that the communities really want. And we really passionately believe, as a group of people in EduSpots, that all fiction, every person should have the chance to have fiction and have books that mirror and reflect their worlds in different ways. And I'm sure Ghanaians in the room, you can throw into the chat any comments you have in relation to this, that over the years EduSpots has got a lot of free books that have been delivered to these centres. If you missed the start, EduSpots is this network of community change makers that stretches across Ghana and wider West Africa. And I feel I'm really speaking on behalf of people who I should really allow to speak at this point, but don't want to put them on the spot. But if you have enjoyed today's sessions with Jon and hopefully learn a lot from his ideas, and I'm sure lots of you are already acting in line with a lot of them, but we'd also love you to consider making a donation to support us being able to have further African books by African authors in our spots that also empower African authors at the same the same time. Thank you so much, Jon, for all the ideas you've shared tonight. I'm going to once again say that the book is now available to buy. I'm particularly lucky because I do have a signed version. And if you do have the ability to come to Sevenoaks, we're also holding another talk with Jon on the 6th of May in Sevenoaks, when you will have a chance to ask further questions. But I know that if anyone wants to engage with Jon further, he is quite active on Twitter and LinkedIn and all sorts of areas. So if you want to continue this important conversation, I really suggest that you do get in touch. And I'm sure he'll be keen to continue to answer your questions. Yeah, I think that's the end of this session. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me, everyone, and all those of you who are involved in EduSpots. Like, you rock, and I hope I can be in touch with you more